their ACE score. We know that children in foster care are more likely to experience cumulative stress ACEs, one after another, even after controlling for other factors like poverty. We know that parents are more likely that have ACEs to have children with behavioral problems. One of the top reasons that children enter foster care in Kansas is child behavior problems. What do we know about the parents of those children and their own experience with adverse childhood experiences? And we know that parents who experienced ACEs in their own childhood oftentimes have challenges in parenting, which makes sense. If they experienced ACEs as a child and they didn't have a safe, stable, consistent caregiver who helped mitigate that experience of trauma, they then didn't learn the skills perhaps and how to be there for their child. So what happens is those parents get frustrated or overwhelmed easily. They have a crying, screaming child or a defiant, lying adolescent, and they're flooded with emotion, and they don't know how to respond appropriately. Or they might miss cues. The child might be expressing that they need a hug or compassion, and they might see frustration from the child or willful disobedience. Again, think about that parent as a child. If their parent was missing the cues and not responding the way that they needed to, they didn't learn that skill. So it's no wonder we end up having families involved in foster care where we see what we think of as bad behavior from the parents. What I see are parents who never had a mitigating factor for their ACEs and never received the right kind of intervention and are parenting the best way they know how. That sometimes hurts children. I'm on this slide, if you can follow along with me, that is called ACEs, Foster Care and Placement Stability. We are lucky enough to have a study that was done right here at KU looking at kids in Kansas foster care. You can't get a better study if you want to know what's happening with ACEs and foster care in Kansas. There was one that came out in 2021. They looked at 3,000 children experiencing foster care in Kansas, ages 6 to 18. And of their study, 99.6%, so nearly everybody, reported at least 2 or more ACEs. So we know our children who are experiencing foster care, much like the national data, have higher levels of ACEs. Those children also had higher rates of placement instability and slower rates of reunification. So the group that had 6 to 9 early childhood adverse experiences went home more slowly and had higher rates of placement instability. They also found that there was other characteristics in those children that led to poor outcomes in foster care. So for example, a child's race, their biological sex, the age that they entered foster care, and whether or not they had a sibling in foster care all impacted their placement stability and their reunification rates. So non-white male children who were age 10 or older when they entered foster care were more likely to be placed in a congregate care setting. So this is somewhere other than a family, which is where we want kids to be placed. They might have been in a group home, a PRTF, a QRTP, a hospital. They were not with a family member, more likely to not be with a family member. And we also know that if they didn't have siblings, they were more likely to experience placement disruption. So I thought you might also be interested in, if we know that so many kids in foster care have had an experience of ACEs, what are we doing to help those children when they enter foster care? So within 20 days of a child entering foster care in Kansas, they are assessed for a number of things. One of those is exposure to ACEs and symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, which we also know go hand in hand. So there's 2 assessment tools that focus on trauma that are asked of every child and family when they're age 6 and older. That one of the questionnaires goes to the child, so their caseworker or a mental health provider asks the child questions about exposure to trauma and about their current symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Because we also know that children can experience trauma and have very different responses than another person. And we ask the caregivers of those children about experiences of trauma in the family from the child's perspective. So as the parent is asked, have your children experienced any of these things, and are they current having any of these symptoms? And you might wonder, why are you asking different people in the family the same questions about trauma? Family members experience trauma in really different ways and will report differences, and it's not because they're trying to keep things from one another. Oftentimes, they don't all have the same information. So for example, I will see children report being bullied at school as a traumatic event much more often than I will see parents endorsing that for their child. Perhaps they didn't know their child was being bullied in school, or they didn't realize it was as traumatic for that child as the child is identifying it to be. Seeing a dead body in one's community is something that child will often identify, and perhaps the parent has been desensitized to that because they have had such levels of violence in their community that they may not have identified that in the same way. So what happens next after that, when a child is been determined to have exposure to trauma and have symptoms? So this could be the child saying, I'm having difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. I feel jittery, on edge. If they're expressing some of those symptoms, then they may be referred for more evaluation, counseling services. A meeting might happen at school because as you can imagine, it's really hard to go to school and focus and learn.
And that tablet joined immediately.
If you think that bear is coming with you to school. I don't know where that's going. Okay. And there needs to...
literally went to his calendar.
Okay, everybody on WebEx should be muted right now. We can hear a voice coming through. Thanks.
And there oftentimes needs to be various meetings that are happening. So the temporary caregiver, it could be a relative or a foster family that's caring for that child, they need to understand the ACEs and the impact, the symptoms that child's experiencing. Because again, families who are setting out to provide a safe, loving, nurturing environment are oftentimes confused. Why is this child behaving in this way in my home? Well, that child feels like the bear is right there with them still, even though there isn't a bear. They can't remove that experience, and so their system is being flooded. They go to school and they can't learn properly. We need to have meetings at the school to help the school understand what that child needs to have a safe, connected relationship with the caregivers around them so that they can feel ready to learn at school. So to summarize, we know that when children are exposed to these levels of chronic stress and adverse childhood experiences, they're flooded with these really high levels of stress that interrupt their development in childhood and long term. And we know that safe, stable relationships with adults act as a mitigating factor for the long-term impact of ACEs. So talking about ACEs can feel very sad, but I want to move to protective factors, because many of you in this room might have been sort of counting up in your head, oh my gosh, I have 3, I have 4, I have 7, but look at me, I'm doing okay. I bet you anything, if I gave you a assessment for protective factors, you would be able to check off quite a few as well, because you had likely people in your life that were looking out for you. Could have been a grandma, could have been a coach, could have been a neighbor next door. Those safe relationships act as a mitigating, buffering factor for ACEs, and we can build these into Kansas families who don't currently have them. So there is a slide, past this one, that shows the impact of ACEs and depression. So this study was done in 2017. It looked at adults who had 4 or more ACEs and the impact of depression. And they asked the respondents in 4 different categories. Did you have a family who stood by you? Those who said yes, 27% of them went on to develop depression. Those who said no, 48.3% went on to have depression. Slide after this one. Felt supported by friends, 31% went on to have depression, 49% who did not feel supported by friends went on to have depression. Had a sense of belonging in high school, 29% compared to almost 46%. Enjoyed community traditions, 27% compared to 42.4%. Having those safe, stable connections, whether it's to their school, their family, or their community, change the likelihood of depression by 10 to 15%. All of these individuals had the same number of ACEs, or at least more than 3. But those mitigating factors had a significant difference on the likelihood whether or not they went on to experience depression. So what are these protective factors, and how can we continue to infuse them into our Kansas communities? So families that have safe, stable, nurturing relationships, children who have positive peer relationships, who do well in school, caregivers who can meet their basic needs of safe housing, of access to food and shelter and health care, caregivers who have employment opportunities, who have education opportunities, social support networks, the opportunity to provide good parenting skills to their children, families who can resolve conflict peacefully, and families who have fun together. Sometimes we forget about that, right? Families who have fun, all of these act as buffers to trauma. We can build communities that buffer the effects and even prevent ACEs from even occurring. This is from the research. If we build communities where families have access to economic and financial help, access to medical care and mental health services. Again, think of those ACEs. If my parent has a mental illness or substance abuse but doesn't have access to services, the buffering impact isn't able to come in line the same way if they have access to services. Safe, stable housing, safe childcare, high-quality preschool, before and after school programs for kids, adults that have opportunities to work, partnerships, communities where families feel connected to other families in the community, and communities that don't tolerate violence happening in their community. Because again, children thrive when they are connected to regular interactions with responsive, caring adults. So some key takeaways. I'm at second to the last slide. ACEs are common and preventable. Protective factors act as a buffer against the impact of ACEs. Treating parents who have experienced ACEs themselves, offering them access to services in our community, reduces the likelihood of child abuse and neglect happening with the next generation. And family separation should be used as a choice of last resort, because again, we are adding an ACEs score to that child when we remove them from their home. There's a lovely chart at the end. You're about to embark on a really busy legislative session. You're going to make really important decisions about what's funded and what's not, and what programs stay and what programs get boosted up. On this one with the purple heading, there's a strategy and there's an approach. This is all evidence-based interventions that directly target the impact of ACEs and act as a buffer for those early adverse childhood experiences. So strengthening economic supports to families, ensuring a strong start for children, again, through high quality education and preschool, home visitation for parents, teaching parenting skills, things like emotion regulation. Again, if as a parent, I can be in tune to my child and I can regulate my own emotions, I am much more likely to respond with safe, loving interventions than picking up something and using it as discipline because I am flooded and overwhelmed. Interventions that lessen that immediate and long-term health impact of ACEs. Connecting youth to caring adults and activities like mentoring and after-school programs, and promoting social norms that protect against violence and adversity. All of these things will help create safer children, safer families, and safer communities. And I would love to answer any questions you have.
Ooh, you made it through. You do have a few minutes to stay and answer some questions. Do we have questions? Representative Humphreys.
Thank you so much. That's a great, I've had some sort of presentation before, but this was really complete and good. My question has to do with if you have studies that show, you say traumatic events that occur in childhood 0 to 17. Have you seen studies, or is there any data on preborn ACEs? What happens during pregnancy, and are those included in your counting of ACEs?
That's a great question. The original ACEs study did not have like in utero drug exposure as an item that was endorsed, but subsequent evaluations of families and exposure to trauma we know from the research that in utero exposure to drugs or alcohol or other adverse things do leave a lasting imprint on children and child development. And so it is now commonly thought of as an ACE to have that in utero exposure, but that original one that came out in the 90s did not include that as one of the items that was assessed.
Interesting. And I'm just curious if some of this a strategy would be just, kind of special care for pregnant women could be included in one of the strategies.
Absolutely, and that home visiting programs, there's lots of types of home visiting, obviously, but like nurse-family partnership is one that has great evidence to show that having somebody come into the home after a newborn, and even before the baby is born, right? And then continue after for several months or even several years, acts as a buffer to make sure that child not only is on track developmentally, but that parent is getting skill building around nurturing and bonding and attaching to their baby. But those in-home programs are so important.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Howell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask you, under the slide, it says ACEs foster care and placement stability, the very bottom bullet point that was referencing siblings in foster care. I don't think I understood exactly what you said. So could you just kind of best of your ability, restate that and maybe expound on it just a touch?
Yeah, so they looked at children's ACEs scores, but also other characteristics and demographics that child was experiencing. And they found some things that they didn't set out necessarily to find. And so one of the things they found is that individuals who did not have siblings in care with them and siblings who were older, 10 and older, who were non-white, who were male, all of those characteristics led to greater rates of placement instability and greater placement in a congregate care setting instead of with a family.
So we're talking about children who have siblings, who they're not necessarily placed with, not children who have no siblings.
They did not have siblings.
All right.
Any other questions? Representative Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I may have missed it. I happen to have left my glasses somewhere that I can't find, and I'm unable to read some of this. Maybe you mentioned it and I didn't hear it, but in one of these ACEs, was there anything related to like lack of nutritional value or food insecurity in the children? Was that considered?
Yeah, so it is in two different areas. So one, in looking at just disproportionality and which families have greater exposure to ACEs, we know that families who aren't able to meet their basic needs, like food insecurity or unsafe housing, are more likely to have a disproportionate amount of ACEs. We also know that that issues of neglect, like not having food or access to the right resources, is the primary reason that children enter foster care in Kansas. So it shows up in two different ways.
So, if I may follow up. So, with respect to a follow-up question that my colleague had, I understand that there's no data that would indicate whether that could have been transmitted from a parent, a woman who's pregnant in her pregnancy, who herself was suffering from food insecurity or lack of nutrition, or did you say that you didn't have that data at this time, or?
So I didn't include in this presentation food insecurity around pregnancy and the impacts of that. But what we do know from this presentation and other studies is that families who lack basic needs are at risk for being surrounded by situations that increase the likelihood that ACEs will occur. And so, for example, one of the things that we see a lot with families experiencing foster care in Kansas is parents who don't have safe, stable housing may choose temporarily to live with somebody or to leave their child in the care of somebody while they work a first, second, third shift, that then exposes that child to an ACEs that parent did not, the parent did not cause that trauma to the child, but the living situation had them at higher risk for having an adverse childhood experience occur because of not having access to safe, stable housing or not having appropriate child care, so that child had to be left with somebody who hurt them in some way.
Thank you.
Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Linda, for being here. Strengthening household financial security on your second to last slide. Can you give us an example of that?
So that would be things like access to TANF funds, those concrete needs, being able to pay for food, to have support with job preparedness, with building families up economically to a point of survival, does have a direct correlation with not only the overall level of parenting stress, but also the situation that children may find themselves in if those basic needs are not in place. So one of the risk factors you'll see is parent stress, not just your everyday stress. As parents, we feel stress, but feeling completely incapacitated. You can imagine if you don't know where you're going to sleep tonight, your child is sick, they've been sick for 3 days, but you don't have medical care for them. You're suffering from depression, but you don't have a health insurance of your own. All of these things weigh at such high levels of parental distress, it almost makes it impossible for parents to make good decisions. And those risk factors directly correlate to the exposure to higher rates of adverse childhood experiences. So living in those situations doesn't always mean that's going to happen, but it elevates the risk of that happening.
Am I wrong to throw minimum wage increase into that category as well, as far as financial security? I mean, would policies such as a minimum wage increase help contribute to strengthening that?
Yeah, I didn't put in any studies that have a specific dollar amount, but we know when families can meet their basic needs, parents have access to employment, job training, things of that nature. Not only does their stress level go down, but they can create safer environments for children to grow up in.
And I appreciate that, Madam Chair. One more if I can. I know we're running long. Down and promote social norms. You have legislative approaches to reduce corporal punishment. Does KVC operate only in Kansas? And I should know the answer to that question. If so, if not, how does that apply to Kansas? And then I have one more follow-up if I can.
We don't operate just in Kansas. We're also in Nebraska, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Missouri.
And I asked that, I'll let you finish it. How does that legislative approach to reduce corporal punishment apply in Kansas? Is there something this committee can do? Is there something this committee could advocate for?
So that recommendation came from the Annie Casey Foundation about action steps that legislative bodies could take to help mitigate or reduce the likelihood of child maltreatment. And I can look to see if there's specific legislative language that has been put out and follow up with you.
That'd be wonderful. And then I know you said that removal should be the last piece because, you know, you've just added another ACE to that child. And recently it was brought to my attention that Texas has for a while ceased removal of children except in, help me out, emergency situations. And I didn't know if KVC operated in Texas to know how that's going, you know, because I'm really curious to find out more about that policy change.
We are not operating in Texas, but some of the other case management providers are operating in Texas, so they may have information to share now or at a future opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you.
Representative Lewis, did you have a question? Yes. Yes, you do. One last question.
All right. Thank you
for
very much, Madam Chairman. So have you seen any studies that consider whether or not experiencing an ACEs causes that child to be more vulnerable to further ACEs experiences?
Yeah.
What does that show?
Yes, there are studies. I didn't bring any of them with me, but I'm happy to follow up that show that experiencing a trauma as a child makes someone more vulnerable to experiencing additional traumas, not only as a child, but as an adult. We didn't talk much today about adult, but it's not like when someone turns 18, we're invincible, right? So oftentimes somebody might be in a relationship with somebody who's violent to them. They might experience lots of different types of trauma. And we also know that those cumulative traumas continue to add to those poor health consequences. And we know that there are certain groups, such as families that are experiencing foster care, that have those cumulative ACEs building on themselves. And so oftentimes you'll see children who had 2, 3, 4 as a child, and then they may have 2, 3, 4 more experiences as an adult. and then they're trying to parent, have a healthy partnership, get to work every day. If they don't have intervention, none of us could do it.
More. You've mentioned the cumulative, you have more than one. Have you seen any studies that examine I'll call it the marginal detriment to the child from each additional one? In other words, from the first to the second, is there an increase, and then second to third, is there an increase in detriment to the child from the latter?
There is some literature on that. I don't want to offer any statistics, so I don't want to misrepresent them. And then even within that, there are exceptions to that, right? But when we look at the exceptions to, like, why does this person have 9 and they're doing so well in so many areas? If we really look back, what the literature will show is that they had many of those protective factors and that they had access to support and treatment when they needed it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Sorry to run you a little late, but we really appreciate it and appreciate your expertise in this area. So I'm going to return to requests for bill introductions at this time. Representative Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have RS number 24RS 2541, which is an act concerning schools relating to school districts and non-public schools, authorizing schools to maintain emergency albuterol kits and school personal administrators, giving them such medication in an emergency situation, also establishing training requirements for the administration of such medication, exempting certain persons from the practice of healing arts and civil liability if prescribing or administering such medication in good faith.
Okay, we've got the request. Are there any objections from the committee? Okay, if not, we'll request introduction. Thank you. Any others from the committee? Any others from the audience? I don't see any. Okay. All right, we'll move on. Next up, I'm going to save introductions and that stuff to the end. Next up, we're going to hear from Melissa Rooker with the Children's Cabinet. Welcome back.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee for your interest in the topic today. I appreciated the previous conferee and the testimony talking about ACEs and describing them in much more detail than I have the expertise and training to do. So that provides a helpful grounding to what I will present today, which is a discussion of some of the work the Children's Cabinet is engaged in the prevention space. So what you heard about really focused on the impact of ACEs and what needs to happen when children have experienced ACEs. What we like to do is try and prevent those things from happening or from having that adverse effect on children. So by way of background, for those of you who are not familiar with the Children's Cabinet, the first page or so of the testimony gives background, and I've distributed our annual report for 2023 to committee members. That report is also available at ks.gov for those of you watching online or who prefer a digital version. We report annually because we are required to in state statute. The Children's Cabinet was created in 1999 and it has very specific role and responsibilities that are outlined in statute, and that really pertain to the well-being of children and families. Long before I arrived on scene at the Children's Cabinet in 2019, the Cabinet had adopted the Blueprint for Early Childhood, which focuses the investments in the Children's Initiative Fund on healthy development, strong families, and early learning. So we have a whole state agency and then some devoted to the child welfare system and those programs that serve children when crisis has happened and there needs to be interventions. The Children's Cabinet focuses on primary prevention strategies. So those things that you heard about that are in the protective factors realm are the type of programs that our funding supports. So we focus on parent education and lots of things that I'm excited to tell you about today. Our work is anchored in research. So the testimony gives you a link to the Center for the Study of Social Policy's Protective Factors Framework, so you can take a look at the framework itself if you're so interested. But we know that to mitigate those adverse early experiences and promote positive outcomes for children and families, we need to focus on parent resilience to stress, adversity, and trauma, positive social connections for the parent and child, parent understanding of child development. So, they don't give you an instruction manual when you take your first child home from the hospital, and that can be a daunting experience as a first-time parent. So parent education and support to make sure that there is the right understanding of child development. Concrete supports, that was discussed, and then the focus on the social and emotional strengths of children so that they have the resilience internally and in their own experiences to respond and survive. We really want to ensure childhood is a happy, hopeful experience for all of our children, and we know that for too many that's not the case. Some of the strategies that I want to focus on today, really, and you can find more detail on each of these programs in the annual report, which is why I wanted to make sure to give you each a copy today. But we have several different strands of funding that the cabinet oversees. In my testimony, I have really called out the community-based child abuse prevention, or CBCAP, funding that we receive from the federal government. This is the Administration for Children and Families through Health and Human Services. It's a grant program, and the Children's Cabinet serves as the state lead. It's not a lot of money, but the impact of the work is I think, huge. So I outlined some of the specific programs that our funding is supporting. We start with the Kansas Children's Service League's Wichita Crisis Nursery, which is a program designed to strengthen families by providing parent education, respite and emergency, short-term child care, case management, and support services for parents. They offer non-traditional hours, which are really hard to come by. When you have a crisis brewing and it's not 9 to 5, it can be hard to know how to deal. So they make referrals, and it's a comprehensive program that helps support families going through issues. They employ the evidence-based P positive parenting program, which was mentioned in the prior presentation. And we have been pleased over the years with the results of that program. We fund something called the Family Resource Center Response Advocate Program. This is in Southeast Kansas. It aims to reduce the risk of crisis, support families who've suffered disruption that threatens family stability, and equip families with resiliency skills. Services provided include a range of things from home visiting, parent education, case management, referrals to community-based services, and the like. Response advocates work closely with law enforcement. Oftentimes police get called in, but it's not something criminal happening, but there is a crisis. And so the response advocates are social workers and people that can help intervene when law enforcement isn't needed, when it hasn't reached that level. And they too they use the Protective Factors Survey and the Strengthening Families approach. The Pony Express Partnership for Children Family Support Program is located in Marshall and Washington counties. It provides prenatal support. It provides rental assistance to help families, those at risk of homelessness, home visiting with comprehensive case management, early intervention screenings, individualized parenting education, resource and referral services, and quality childcare for second shift working parents. A newer program is preventive legal service. We have several different pilot projects in play in the state. You have heard about the dearth of legal services in certain regions. We've heard the same thing. And the point of the pilot is to help families with civil legal needs focused on preventing a gap in the right kind of guidance and legal support from turning into a crisis for the families. So it's often related to housing and the kinds of things where some good legal advice can help a family stay in their home or navigate different types of legal issues. Kansas Holistic Defenders is in Shawnee County running the pilot for us, and their focus is on supporting families with challenges related to housing and eviction and accessing benefits to address critical social determinants of health to support and stabilize families with their basic needs. So our funding is supporting one staff attorney and one client advocate for legal services and family advocacy. We have the Kansas Children's Service League Parent-Child Assistance Program, or PCAP, which is also, it's not just funded by our CBCAP funding, but it's also Family First Prevention Services through the Kansas Department for Children and Families. PCAP targets early identification of parents experiencing challenges with substance use and provides intensive in-home support to families. The goal of this program is to engage the parent in substance use assessment and treatment services, provide recovery support, increase positive parent-child interactions, improve child well-being, and prevent child maltreatment. And then another program we wanted to feature is the Southeast Kansas Library System, utilizing the Family Engagement in Public Libraries program. That model includes playdates to provide in-time parenting information and support for families, opportunities for social interaction and increased parental resilience, developmentally appropriate story times, intentionally planned to model interactions for families, and access to play areas which provide safe spaces with developmentally appropriate toys and manipulatives, as well as parenting information. This program applies a primary prevention approach to meeting families where they are in safe, accessible spaces where families feel comfortable asking for help. We also have a range of programs and services funded through the Early Childhood Block Grant. The annual report details each and every one of the programs served, so in the interest of time, I won't go through that at the moment. But I wanted to take a moment to talk about the data that we bring to bear, because we, in addition to what you heard from the previous conferee, we too engaged in a study. We wanted to know the effect of these programs that are in the Children's Cabinet portfolio, the Early Childhood Block Grant and CBCAP grant programs, and the impact they're having on preventing removal into foster care. So we, through the Early Childhood Data Trust, we partnered with the Department for Children and Families. We created a data sharing agreement and conducted a study that married up foster care data with our Children's Cabinet data. And you'll see in testimony that I think we testified last year on this, parents receiving these parent-centered services and supports were 35% less likely to have their children removed into foster care, because we're helping build those skills that help them navigate the life's challenges and employ positive parenting strategies. We are also, as a state, we have a partnership of state agencies participating in a national project called Thriving Families, Safer Children. This is sponsored by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, Prevent Child Abuse America, the U.S. Children's Bureau, the CDC, and the Casey Family Programs. Our state team includes the Cabinet, DCF, KDHE, KSDE, KCSL, and the KU Center for Public Partnerships and Research. The initiative is intended to collectively reframe our approach to child welfare by creating an intentional, coordinated effort to invest in a full continuum of prevention programs that strengthen families and promote child well-being to keep families together and children safe from harm. The aim is to intervene before a family reaches the crisis stage so children can thrive within their family with the connections, supports, and resources they need. So I've given you links in the testimony to further learn about that project. Because we think the work is really important. It's not enough just to focus on strengthening the child welfare system. We want to strengthen the child well-being system in Kansas so that we can shrink the need for the child welfare services. Kansas also became one of the first states in the country to implement the Family First Prevention Services Act program in 2019 to implement evidence-based programs designed to prevent the need for foster care. This program is administered primarily by DCF. There is a line item in the Children's Initiative Fund budget that we pass through as part of the state match for that program from the tobacco settlement funding. But the Family First program offers an opportunity to ensure the safety and well-being of children, youth, and families through parent skill building, mental health services, substance use, and kinship navigator services. We support DCF's implementation of Family First programs, and together we're focused on integrating and aligning our programs into a comprehensive continuum of prevention services at the statewide and the community level. We also have strong collaboration with our partners at KDHE to align prevention efforts with their maternal and child health priorities, including screening for child development, maternal depression, and substance use in order to stabilize and intervene early. I want to note, and I called this out in testimony, I put it in bold so that your eye is caught. Family First Prevention Services, we have data that begins in October of 2019 through June of 2023. Kansas Family First has received 4,280 referrals. Of the families served, only 6% of the children have been placed in foster care during an open Family First case. 89% of children and youth who reached the 12-month point from the time of service referral remained together at home without the need for foster care. 89% were able to stay together. So it shows the power of taking a preventive approach and reframing and thinking about child well-being. And finally, I note in testimony, we operate 1-800-CHILDREN. Collectively, the 4 state agencies participate in supporting 1-800-CHILDREN, which is administered and operated by Kansas Children's Services League. It is a warm line. It is not a crisis line. It is intended to be a resource for families that have questions, and it can serve as a good point of connection to help parents not feel so alone and you know, so afraid of what they're dealing with. So we have lots of information that we can talk about, but I wanted to just give you that overview of the prevention side of things, because I think too often we focus on the things that happen after a family is referred to the system, as it were, and there's really important work in Kansas happening to prevent that from ever being the case for our children and their families. So with that, Madam Chair, I think it would be a good time for me to stand for questions.
Okay, thanks, and thank you for your presentation and for being here today. I think that it's good for us to hear. You know, we talk a lot about programs and prevention, but the reasons why we are doing that is what today is all about. So, committee, do we have questions?
I would just, while you're getting organized, the final page of testimony is from Kansas Children's Services League. It's just a really nice one-page handout on ACEs that I think is a nice complement to the detailed presentation you heard from the prior speaker.
Okay, great. Committee, do we have questions? And I noticed we have Gail here from Kansas Children's Services League. So just so you know, that she's a great resource for all of these, if you need to know any information about ACEs or all of these programs, any of these programs.
KCSL serves as the Kansas Prevent Child Abuse America chapter, so they are a strong partner of ours.
Representative Ford.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Carr, sorry.
It's okay. I'm used to it. Trust me.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Question: in the unlikely event that that there would be a situation where a child would be removed from his or her family for a situation as simple as the lack of cabinet doors on kitchen cabinets, is this something that you would be able to step in and replace those cabinet doors so that we could eliminate the removal of a child in a situation?
Appreciate that question. That is, we don't directly fund the acquisition of cabinet doors and installation, but we fund programs that have access to different resources. There are housing programs that offer certain funds that can be used for maintenance and that. The Family Response Advocate team in Southeast Kansas would be one of those teams that would see a problem like that and help that family solve that problem, because they know that is poverty, or that's lack of resources. That is not abuse. That's not intentional neglect. That's circumstances. And there are definitely avenues to helping intervene. I mean, that would be the purpose of the type of programs that we support with our funding.
Could we get, because that is an actual situation, by the way, can we
Do you need active assistance now to help a family, or has it been resolved and you're sharing an anecdote?
I won't say that it was resolved. I'll just say that I'm sharing the situation that occurred, and the removal has already taken place because of that. So would you have, or could you provide us with the resources that I might be able to pass on to someone in the event a situation like this occurs again?
I will get with you after this committee to share some contact information, and then I will follow up with you with a response.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, further questions? Representative Hoagland. Sorry, first day, and I'm just like, yeah, who are you?
So in a follow-up from Representative Carr's question, thank you, by the way, how do we get the social workers that are making the call to engage with the resources that are available rather than removing the child?
Well, I would say you're asking a question we need Department for Children and Families in the room to answer, because we don't engage in that piece of the state system. That is entirely the purview of DCF. So I don't want to stand here and try and answer on their behalf. I do know that we endeavor from our perspective to support families, connect them to resources, and prevent the need from ever happening. So we have helped fund a closed loop referral system called IRIS that operates in a number of communities around the state. And I can connect you to the map of those communities I can provide to the committee. There are other systems like that in operation, so I don't want to say we are the be-all, end-all, but at the community level, if you have a central access point that can be, so maybe a family is, I don't know where, at the library or at the housing authority trying to get assistance, and something else is revealed where a referral to a program would be beneficial. A closed loop referral system is a way of ensuring that contact is made with that family from the agency receiving the referral, and the referring entity at least knows contact was made. That it doesn't necessarily, our IRIS system doesn't tell the referring entity what the outcomes are, but at least there's some assurance that the referral was made, the family was contacted, and so, then it becomes the family choice of whether to respond and participate. So I'm not the specialist on all things foster care, but we are working to reduce the need for those services.
And that's a really good question to ask. Andrea's here, and she can take that question back to the secretary. The secretary is going to be here Monday. Is that right? Monday. Yeah, and I can see on Gail's face that she might have something to add. Would you want to come up and?
Thank you. Gail Kozad. I'm the CEO for Kansas Children's Service League, and we currently are partnering with DCF for that exact thing. So we are working with them on a training for professionals both within the school districts as well as internally within the Department for Children and Families to talk about what we're calling a shift in perspective, which is really data-driven around some of the things that you're talking about here, reasons for removal, what that data shows, the impact of children being removed from foster care or removed from their home and placed in foster care, and how we can do some work up front to support them better. And part of that presentation is around knowing about resources in your community. So it is connecting it to 1-800-CHILDREN, which we're encouraging social workers through DCF to download on their phones so they have immediate ability to look up resources in their community that can help that family versus doing a removal. Now, that takes some time, so give us a little bit of time.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for popping up. Any other questions from Representative Wagoner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been on this committee, the precursor to this committee, since I first came here in 2019. And, the Family First preservation thing has been kind of a big deal, or the federal act passed first, and then I think we passed the state act. And I guess the programs that you mentioned that had, you said basically an 89% as far as, is that, I know there were a couple different versions of, different vendors have sort of different versions of Family First. And is that across the board, or was this just one particular agency's results, or what?
So Family First is it offers grants to different types of service providers. So it's a whole slate of programming. And so what I shared in my testimony is that of the over 4,200 referrals that have been made, so that's a family being referred to one of those Family First programs, and I'm not here to tease out the specific programs themselves, but of that total package of referrals, 89% have managed to keep their families together and keep their children in their homes, because these are referrals made before the inflection point, right? So you see signs that this family needs help, that there is something brewing that is not healthy, that there are ACEs in play. And there is a system, and again, this is a really good question to ask DCF, because they manage that program, and they set up the system for screening when when a family is put on their radar. So they will screen for whether they go this way into the child welfare system, that side of things. Do we need an investigation? Do we need to intervene in that realm? Or is this a family that would benefit from the type of thing that Family First provides? And so they triage, and they shift the families that are appropriate for Family First services. And of those 4,200 referrals. We're seeing great success.
Okay, I've also been on this committee, heard the family or the Children's Cabinet report for many years. I had noticed this last year, and I know it wasn't in previous reports, but the Children's Cabinet, which is a public agency, you have on page 7, a whole outline of our commitment to equity. And as far as equity versus equality is considered, frankly, a very politicized concept. And I'm just kind of wondering why you felt it necessary to actually go that route as far as making this an agenda, an overarching agenda for your work.
Well, it was my governing board that adopted that commitment to and the full statement is published in our public reports. So we are governed by members appointed by legislative leadership and the governor. We meet 6 times a year. We meet bi-monthly. Our next meeting will be February 2nd. And it's the governing board that adopted the commitment to equity that you see published in the report.
One more question. You also have on page 60 of your report another somewhat politicized concept where you talk about climate change as being somehow an overarching, indicator of of how you direct your work and how you appropriate funds.
We do have.
Okay. No, I mean, I might be misquoting it, but tell me how that works.
So what we're reporting is the work in the past year. I was invited to serve on a national task force, the Early Years Climate Action Task Force that was put together by the Aspen Institute and Capita. We are not taking a political stance in the final report. We are not weighing in on the science behind climate change, the causes or whatever. None of that is what we are focused on. What we are focused on in the report and the recommendations is ways of mitigating and adapting to ever more severe weather events. And I think, the overnight temperatures of 16 below this week were especially significant. I think you see it in the increasing ferocity of wildfire events. Like there's any number of events that cause trauma for young children. So the report is really designed to talk more about how to support, to mitigate and adapt in a world where our weather events are more severe and more disruptive, so that, and we heard from child care providers and families and other practitioners around the country. A child care provider in California was the only person in her community who actually could identify which homes in the fire zone were places where children under the age of 5 resided because of the resources she had through her child care center. So she became part of the crisis response team. It's things like that. It's not, I believe it's not a political statement on climate change, but the report itself is just reporting on that activity. It's not taking a stance one way or the other.
Just in closing, I think, again, Children's Cabinet, has a commitment to the whole variety of Kansas citizens, not from just one political persuasion. And I think anything you do that's politicized or potentially politicized, ill serves your ultimate goal. So, thank you.
Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a very specific short question. You mentioned the closed loop referral system, the IRIS system. Does that operate, you said in some communities, how widespread is that?
I will get you a map that shows exactly the footprint of IRIS communities. We don't have the funding to operate it as a statewide system.
And so my question more so about it is when someone, like you said, goes to the library, are they asked for their permission?
Yes.
For someone else to be given their name, a different agency or whatever?
Absolutely.
Okay, so each time there's a referral, they're asked back if it's okay for whoever to refer them to someone else?
They have to give permission and they have to share their information in order for a referral to be made.
One time for everything or each time a referral's made?
I'll get back to you. I don't operate the system.
Yeah,
so.
okay, I would be interested in that if you could. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have further questions? Representative Ousley, always has one, just one.
It doesn't even have to be a question. It could just be a comment. No, on the Family First, and thank you, Mrs. Rooker, for being here. I don't know if you'll know this or not, but the Family First conversation, those were all federally approved. And I know when we first passed it as a state, there was not a large pool of services that had been approved. And maybe this is a question for DCF on Monday, but I'd be curious to see what sort of options that those referrals have now gone to, you know, those 4,200 referrals that you would, there. It's not even a question, it's just a comment. And then I'm listening to the report on the climate change, and I'm thinking, you know, my pipes defrosted at home yesterday, so I'm excited about that, you know. But I do also understand the trauma, you know. I mean, your kids don't know if there's going to be a pipe burst and they're going to be in school or out of school or whatnot. So I appreciate you and your governing body addressing the reports, and then I would just make a statement that I think politicians politicize things, not children's cabinets. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa, for being here, and we really appreciate it and appreciate the work you do. So I'm going to back up to kind of some of the housekeeping things. I want the committee to meet our new committee assistant, Judy Pearson. Yeah, so you'll be getting emails from Judy. I'm sure you already have. So is your team the same? Why you going to let her introduce herself, or you want to do it, Natalie?
Yes, hello. My name is Nicole Rencher. I'm a legislative fellow with the Kansas Legislative Research Department. So this is my first session.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for being here. Let's see, David's not new on this committee, are you? No, I didn't think so. We've got a new WebEx guy in here.
Hi, my name is Sawaro Nadon, my fourth session this year.
Okay. Well, welcome to the Child Welfare Committee. I saw Representative Wassinger. Where'd she go? Oh, would you introduce us to your intern, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really excited to introduce her. This is Gracie Jo Stanton. She's a student at K-State, and she, poor thing, has not been able to get here prior to this because of the weather. And so every day she thought she was going to come. I'm like, don't drive from K-State. Don't do that. Just stay put. She also, I'm going to let her say hello because her mother is very much involved in childcare, and she's very interested in it. So I want her to tell you.
Hi, my name is Gracie Jo Stanton. I am 19 years old, and I am majoring in political science with a minor in literature. And as my mother has always been involved in childcare, she's been involved in the early childcare program. She used to be a grant writer for those programs, and now she works for EICI under the Dane G. Hansen Foundation. I have been very involved in that, and I look up to her as a role model, and I can definitely see childcare being in my future.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for being here. Representative Wassinger had mentioned to me earlier that her intern this year had a special interest in child welfare issues and early child development. So thanks for being here. We'll look forward to seeing you some in this committee.
She came up to my office, and then we ran to higher education budget, and I said, you don't want to be here. You need to go to child welfare, because I think that's where your heart is. So she came down here, and she did
Thanks
really
for
well.
that. We
So
agree.
thank you.
Thanks for doing that. Representative Johnson.
Yes, I'd like to also introduce an intern, if Mason Capper. He is, just step on up real quick, introduce yourself. He is my intern in criminal justice matters this session.
My name is Mason Capper. I'm from Baser, Kansas. I go to school here at Washburn. I play football there, and I'm majoring in criminal justice.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thanks for being here. I think that's all I had for introductions. Just a reminder, we didn't do this today just because it's our first meeting, but we are paperless. So you will not have the testimony. If you could bring your computers. If you really can't do it, we can talk to Judy and see if we can twist her arm to, but you will have the opportunity that you can print it off yourself ahead of time. And then looking ahead, we've already turned the agenda in for next week. So as I mentioned, the secretary will be here Monday. The secretary will be here Monday. I didn't bring that with me, but Monday and Wednesday will both be some of those annual reports. We'll have the Child Death Review Board here. We'll have the Child Advocate for a report. We're going to hear from Natalie a review of the recommendations from the Child Welfare Oversight Committee. And that's the sort of things we're going to do next week. And then we're going to have a hearing on that SOL bill. But right now, you'll see on the agenda, it refers to it as an informational hearing because it's not a bill yet. But we will amend that. It will be a hearing next week on Wednesday. And then Jared just reminded me that, well, new rules for bill introductions. Really, the only difference in this is that if you're making an introduction or requesting an introduction, you state who you are doing it in behalf of. Is that right? Okay. So yeah, that's the only difference. But for example, though, if it's a committee member and you're doing it like Representative Carr on behalf of a constituent, then it's not necessary in that situation. But if you're doing it and you're representing an organization, then you need to state who are there representing or presenting it on behalf of. So with that, we'll see you Monday, and we're adjourned.